Everyone, Walter Crosby with Helix Sales Development, your host for Sales and Cigars. So today our episode is with Peter Anthony, and Peter is over in Australia, just outside of Sydney, a little town called Manly, and he's a manly man. We talk a little bit about he swims in the ocean every morning. I learned a little bit about Australian Constitution and but he's got an interesting perspective on sales and working with clients around collaboration and taking that idea to involving your company's customers, your clients, and engaging them to understand how you can better your relationship and better their customer experience and go from a supplier status to being indispensable. It's a great conversation. We've actually decided to. I think we're going to do a little series of a few of these because we had so much fun with that. So go grab a cigar, go grab a cocktail, and strap in for another fun episode of Sales and Cigars. Peter, welcome to the program. I appreciate you getting up early to join us on this episode of Sales and Cigars.
Good morning from Sydney, Australia, Walter. I've just been for a swim in the ocean, go close to where I live, so I'm all fresh and ready to go.
We had I'm jealous. We had a nice little chat before we started recording, and I'd love for you to talk about, because you created a video on your website. Yes. It's of you walking along the shoreline, but repeat what you were telling me.
Yeah, I live in Manly, which is a suburb of Sydney in Australia, and there's a beautiful walkway from Manly Beach, which is a typical ocean beach with waves, to Shelley Beach, which is a more secluded, almost semi-harbour beach. It's a walk that takes about 10 or 15 minutes. It's my favourite walk in the world, and one of the reasons it's my favourite walk in the world is that my father is also a Manly man. He's a local. And he met my mother in a pub close to where we live, and he asked her out on a date, and he took her for a walk on that same walk from Manly Beach to Shelley Beach. And that's the first place he kissed my mum on that walk.
Wow!
So it's beautifully scenic, as you'll see if you watch the video. It's a gorgeous part of the world, and it's just a very special. It's like one of those geographies. It's just a special place. It's a very yeah.
Well. It was stunning just to watch. I mean, you're walking along, talking and explaining, but I was distracted by like what's going on and with the water and the rock formation to the side. It's just if you have access to that with that kind of history of your family, that's just a cool little walk.
Yeah, if you ever get to come to Manly, go on that walk. Go early in the morning or late in the afternoon. It's the best times to do it. During the day, it gets a little crowded. It's just you can watch the sunrise there, watch the sunset behind you. It's highly recommended. It's a very special place.
But I also picked up on the Manly man. That was a cute little. Not letting that go. That's
yes.
Good. So let's talk a little bit. You're big on collaboration, yes. and we were talking a little bit about the idea of helping people in sales, but being able to bring that idea into the mindset. So can we kind of go there and talk a little bit about how you address that, how you think about that?
Yeah, it's interesting, Walter. We're just talking about like client relationships and thinking about, well, initially I started where most people start, by selling and looking at sales training and sales effectiveness. And I found the more I sold, the less sales I had, and the more I taught selling, the less it worked. So over a period of time, I stumbled upon this idea of collaboration, thinking my role is to collaborate with my clients, and my role with them is to help them collaborate more effectively with their clients or customers, and help them put their client or their customer at the center of their business, to be client or customer centric, and to create a collaborative relationship. So it's almost like a three-way outcome. You get your outcomes, the client gets their outcomes, and their customers or clients get their outcomes too. So it's why I call my approach collaboradabra, because there's, like abracadabra, there's magic in collaboration. And if you ask yourself the question, how could I have a more collaborative approach to this? You'll always get a better answer than asking the question, how can I sell this to somebody? Because it sets up a quite a destructive relationship. If you're selling, the person feels like they're buying. This is the same for the clients. And if they feel like they're buying, they're going to distance themselves from you. They're going to get cynical and skeptical, and they're going to put downward pressure on rates and fees. So collaboration is king.
Hmm. Well, it takes out the idea of collaboration with the customer, with the client. It it takes out the transactional
Yeah,
element. It takes out the pressure piece of it, and we start to think about the idea of selling is really helping. And sometimes it's a solving a
yeah,
problem. Sometimes it's just talking something through to help them see a different
yes,
perspective on an idea. And I know a lot with my clients is that we'll talk through a problem, and we don't really need to do much work because they see a way to deal with their
yeah,
situation
yes,
differently. And I had not put the idea of collaboration to that, but you're 100% right. It is sort of a
yeah,
magical
yeah,
experience for
yes,
everybody. And we all win, including their
yeah.
customers and their
Yeah,
vendors even.
and ultimately, what we're after is um, creating a value proposition for their clients or their customers that's unique and valuable to that client or customer, because that means they're going to pay more for that relationship, and it demonstrates a unique understanding and needs demonstrated by the client. So it's and what I find is that when you set the culture up like that, and you set the team up like that, and you set up the individual sales relationships like that, quite often this is where I see the magic happening. It's not your idea or my idea. It's the idea that we arrive at as a result of collaborating together. Like something quite unique and special happens then as a result of that conversation. So it's not like me telling you, you telling me. It's us having that conversation and that mindset, and us arriving at a unique outcome for them. That's how it works.
That excuse me, that's appropriate because it was a mutual walk. Just imagine walking down that pathway along the ocean. You're both walking
Yes,
together, collaborating on what that's going to look like, and you don't necessarily know what it's going to be at the end, but it will be a beautiful sunset or a beautiful sunrise because you're walking together looking at the landscape the
yeah,
same way.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I love
yeah,
that
yeah,
idea.
exactly.
And you take all of that pitching, and you take all of that, like, this is what my product does, or this is what my offering is, and it's more about getting to the right solution for everybody
Yes.
involved, at whatever that
Yeah,
looks
or
like.
not. I mean, I've had the good fortune of working in 12 countries, as we were talking about before we came on air. And quite often I'm thinking, like, what do I know about manufacturing? What do I know about CRM? What do I know about pharmaceuticals? What do I know about cargo? What do I know about engineering? Not much. There's no way I could be a senior project director in a global engineering firm. But what I can do is I can ask the questions and help them take a fresh perspective to how they're thinking about developing their client relationships. And together we can find the answers. Like I'm not walking in saying, here's what you should do. I'm walking in saying, here's how you should think. Here's how you should think about building the
Yeah.
team, building the culture, building those client centric relationships. I know how to do that piece. You've got the expertise technically. You know your clients better than I do. Let's bring them into the center of the conversation, and quite regularly, particularly for big clients, like that. This is clients of my customers. I'll suggest we bring them into the room and we talk to them. We say, look, we are very keen on making this relationship more ideal for you. How can we go about doing that? Look at the key metrics of the relationship from your point of view and say, how are you experiencing us now? And ideally, how would you like to experience us? Because we would like, as much as possible, to give you an ideal experience of us. And even just having that conversation. I mean, I've been asking clients to join these partnership meetings now for 12 or 13 years. I've never had a no, because quite often it's me asking the clients of my clients to have these conversations. And yeah.
Well, it really, I read something this morning that it was from a similar lens. What we're if a company can move faster, can scale quicker, if they're listening to their customers and asking them the right questions, as you
Yes.
say, right? What do we need to change with our packaging? What do we need to change with our ingredients if they're making some sort of food? Or how does our approach need to change? And if you listen and you with the intent of making some sort of change in your organization, and you continually do that and actually make
Yes.
changes
Yes.
that they can see and feel, that's
Yeah.
important. You can that timeline goes really fast. You can get to a better place in a much shorter period of
Yes.
time than by not listening and just assuming things or doing focus
Yes,
groups.
exactly. And just having the conversation by itself changes the relationship, because changes how they're looking at you, and it broadening and deepening the relationship immediately, and the sales revenue will follow. I always like to think about revenue follows relationship. It's the quality of your relationships that is like the leading indicator for the revenue that follows. If revenue comes first, you're almost always going to make a mistake. You think relationship first, revenue second.
Because it's the wrong
Yeah,
motivation.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a motivator that takes you in the wrong
Yes,
direction,
yes,
from the relationship
exactly.
perspective. It's much like a man marrying a woman who's well off. It never
No,
ends
no.
well. We have to, or vice versa.
And it's,
I think there's a
I'm just going to
go
say,
ahead.
like, even in a marriage, this is true of any relationship, and there's good work been done by people like John Gottman from Washington State University in relationship sense. If you think, even if you said to your wife or your partner, honey, I'm interested in making this marriage, this relationship really ideal. Can we have a conversation about that? How we can really, it's great now. How can we make it even better? Even just asking her that question improves the relationships. That shows that you care and that you're thinking about building the relationship. It's true in any relationship, but particularly commercially and particularly in sales relationships, because there is a hangover of old school selling, which is I'm selling, you're buying. Here's the relationship. My job is to sell you as much as possible, and to charge you as much as possible. And if they get that impression, you're doomed, because there are competitors that are not doing that, that are building higher quality relationships.
And you fall into the if you're doing that transactional mentality, you're not doing anyone a service, including
Yeah.
yourself. It's much harder to build a business, if you're thinking transactionally. It's much easier to build those relationships when you're authentic and you're true to what you're trying to accomplish with the
Yes.
collaboration. It solves a lot of problems from a sales
It does solve a
perspective.
lot of problems. It also does a lot more sorting as well as selling, because what I find is too many of the client facing people I work with waste too much time on opportunities that don't develop. And it's almost like they're almost both lying to each other. Like the salesperson is pretending this will close, and the client's pretending it's going to progress. Now, if you take that approach really early on and you ask them to invest in the relationship, it does that sorting really early. Plus, if you're involved in a situation like I am with my clients, where there's multiple stakeholders involved in a sale or involved in that commercial relationship, you need to involve all of those stakeholders, and they could have quite different perspectives. You might be dealing with a technical director and a commercial director and a sales director and a managing director. There could be many people involved if it's a large scale sale in approving and making this decision. And the earlier you get them involved and engaged, the better off you're going to be. I was working with a global CRM provider recently. They work in what they call the mid-market. And I said, look, what's the primary problem we're here to talk about? They said, look, too many of our sales are falling down at the end of the process because we don't get the senior decision makers involved early enough in the sale. And I said, well, I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm also glad to hear that because the approach I'd like to talk to you about is going to get those people involved early. And if there are deal-breaking reasons why it can't progress, you want to know them early before you invest all the resources, and then keep those resources to invest in
Absolutely.
opportunities that can progress. Then you can over-service, if you like, the good opportunities, the ideal clients for you, and not waste time, if I can use that phrase, on people where it's not going to progress because there's a reason in that organization, which means you're never going to win that business. Yeah.
And I think salespeople struggle, and leaders, CEOs, and entrepreneurs struggle with believing that their widget, their CRM, their offering is the
Yes.
best, and that everybody should love it, and it is a good fit for everyone. And I mean, I learned a couple decades ago that I'm not a fit, no matter what I'm selling. I'm not a fit for everybody. I mean, even when you're selling a commodity type product, um, there's there's things that are important to that customer that they need that we may not be really good at. And if I can get that information, early in the process, I can win respect and still maintain a relationship by telling them we're not good
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
That's not something that we can deliver. So, maybe we should, maybe you should look elsewhere, right? Or maybe I can help them. But just the idea of saying no to somebody, that not everyone is a potential a customer or client, is a really difficult thing for certain people to
Yes.
accept.
Yeah.
But if they did, they would save the
Yeah.
biggest, the thing that's the most valuable to an entrepreneur or a salesperson is our time.
Yes. It's our time. Yeah.
And if
It is. It is.
and if they can save that on the
Yeah,
front end, right, they're
yeah,
better
exactly.
off.
And most, if not all, organizations I've worked with, most of their profitable revenue comes from the top tier of their clients or customers. It's the top 10 or 20% that will give you 80% of the revenue, the Pareto principle. You think, well, um, that means
Absolutely.
I need to understand who my ideal client is or ideal customer is, and how do I make myself or make ourselves more ideal for them. And that's what the conversation is about. Thinking about what, and then have a service model for the like the long end of the tail, if you like, for the rest. I'm not saying ignore them. Have a different service model for them, but for the big clients, think about building those high quality relationships. Think about what the metrics of the ideal relationships are. And I often laugh, Walter, too, when I go to meetings. There's a room full of people from the client and me, and they're all trying to understand what the client's looking for, right? And I say, why not ask them? Why not invite them into this conversation, right? Oh no, because
Yeah.
Joe's had 10 years experience and Mary's worked in a client organization and Bob's got a unique. Oh, really? So you really and it's crazy. I think invite them in. Oh, I can't ask them. Well, I'll ask them. Like, give me their number. I'll say, look, I'm calling for IBM, for Microsoft. I'm calling on behalf of name the organization. They would like to invite you into a facilitated meeting to help them understand how they can make their service level and their relationship more ideal for you. I never get a no. Not because I'm so charming, because I'm
Right.
not. It's because they love that offer, right?
Well, you're kind of charming. You're kind of charming.
kind of.
Yeah. I wouldn't sell myself short there. Manly man for manly. But 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 that's a huge differentiator, right? If I can use that word of, I'm going to be different because I'm really interested in what what you care about, Mr.
Yeah,
Customer, and I'm really curious about what we could do better, Mrs. Customer. So how do we, that's just a conversation,
yeah.
and even regular salespeople that are just out there selling a B2B product, but it's not terribly pricey. They still struggle with making assumptions.
Yes, yeah.
Like they don't ask the question; they just
They just
assume,
assume, yeah.
and it always gets
It
them in
gets them into
trouble.
trouble. And it's like any other relationship. It's just like in a marriage relationship or a friendship. I mean, it's like I assumed, Walter, that you'd like this, right? And therefore I got it for you. So, well, Walter, what would be if I'm buying you a Christmas gift? I think what would be what sort of thing you're looking for? What would you like? Where would you like to go? I mean, it's really curious too because then what you can do in your culture is create the sales culture, if you like, that reflects what the client experience is looking for. I often do research with clients where we research the internal culture of the sales organization and we research the customer experience. We do both and they predict each other. I say, which one would you like to see first, the customer experience or the internal culture? Because they reflect each other. Because then you adjust the culture and you employ people with high performer role benchmarks that are sort of people that are the same sort of people that high performers in terms of high performing relationship builders with the ideal clients that you have. And they reflect each other. And you tell your clients you're doing this. You don't hide it. You say, hey, we've just done a high performer role benchmark. We've noticed that these particular attributes are attributes of people that serve you the best, that have a unique understanding of you. So we're going to get more of them. We get because we're heavily invested in this relationship, and the revenue will follow. The revenue will follow because that's what the clients are looking for. And if you look at exit research, as I often do, researching clients to say, what's the main thing you're looking for from a relationship with this particular organization? The number one thing, Walter, that comes out again and again is I want someone that has a unique understanding of my needs and my environment. They're not satisfied because the research also says that 80% of satisfied customers are happy to change suppliers. 80%. So satisfaction, oh, we've got satisfied clients. Really, I'd be worried. If you're happy with satisfaction,
Hmm.
just like you say to your wife, oh, honey, I'd like us to have a satisfactory marriage. It's satisfactory. I think that's great. Really? Watch her explode, right? It's just not going to work. Or I say to my
Right.
mates, look, that was a really satisfactory swim this morning. I think Manly Beach is a satisfactory. Really? Satisfaction?
Right.
Give me a break. I want you to be. I want you to think this is ideal, and I want you to understand. I'm committed to making this more ideal because I'm obsessed with this. I'm obsessed with helping you get your client
Hmm.
outcomes. And wow, okay, cool. It changes the conversation.
It completely changes the conversation, and but it does require a commitment on the company's part to change their internal
Yes,
culture, change their internal thinking, and what this is the friction point that I see often, even with just talent, right? If we're just looking at sales talent, we want somebody that's performance based, that wants to perform at a
yeah,
high level, and the company is accepting mediocrity from these low performers or
yeah,
non-performers. To me, it's an obvious thing that we should fix within the sales culture. That once we stop accepting mediocrity, that allows everybody else to say, "Oh, these guys are serious. They really want to move
yes,
forward," and they punch it and go a little harder. If we start to thin that herd, but that is a friction point for a lot of sales leaders and CEOs. And from what I've seen, that they're hesitant to thin the herd, if you
mm,
will, to get rid of the people that are underperforming. And there's numbers based, right? We can document win rates, we can document average deal size, sales cycle, right? We can look at all these performance figures and show them numbers like this person's performing and this person isn't by a wide
yes,
margin. This we need to replace this person. And what you're talking about from a culture perspective, there's a period of time where you're you need to measure those relationships, and you need to measure that
yes,
experience. that becomes even more difficult, right? For people to they have to be really committed to the
Yes.
idea to start to make those
Yeah.
changes. Is
Yeah.
that
Two
fair?
important things you've said there, Walter. One is the leader must be committed. I mean, I like to say, show me the leader, I'll show you the culture. That's why I need to meet with her or meet with him and ensure they're on board because they're the one driving this. The second part of that was what I struggled with for many years, which is to understand how do you create a performance culture? And what we do now is we measure what are called high performer role benchmarks. We look at we say if you've got a team of 50, maybe there's 10 high performers or 8 high performers, and we measure them and think, what have they got in common? Like even things like people will say, oh, my high performers are good with numbers. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean they're good at understanding numbers, which is like numeric ability, or is it good at arguing with numbers, which is numeric reasoning, and work out where they are at a scale of, say, 1 to 9. They're a level 7 on numeric reasoning, for example. And hypothetical thinking or imagination, or they're high on extroversion or high on whatever it might be. We work out what they've got in common.
Storytelling, is
They're
that
good at
part of that
storytelling. They're good
scorecard?
at telling the strategic story. And you think, okay, if that's what all the high performers are good at, let's look at where the rest are and then make a decision. Like if numeric reasoning is, say, a 7 on a scale of 1 to 9, and they're a 2 or a 3, it's going to be too hard to get them up to what's required for high performance. So you're actually doing them a favor, having the conversation, say, hey, the role that you're engaged in, it looks like here's where the high performer role benchmark is, and help them move on. And then you can train and coach the rest up to where the benchmark is. And when you're employing new salespeople, you employ people to that benchmark because you know in advance that they're the sort of people that have the characteristics required to deliver the customer experience that's ideal for the customers. And you can measure this. You can measure this, and you can develop that. Then you've got a high performing culture, and people feel good by doing well. You don't need to ring the bell to do this. You know because
Hmm.
people are performing well. They feel great. They're around fellow performers, and they are serving clients in a way that grows the business, and it grows it profitably, because that margin of relationship is the margin between the lowest parity price that what you're selling goes for and the top price. And that margin is the margin of your relationship. The revenue equals the revenue margin. The relationship equals the revenue
Yeah,
margin. Does that make sense?
that's
Yeah.
brilliant. No, that's brilliant. Being able to talk about the value of the relationship and the value of what's being delivered, and allowing you to not just talk about value, but actually that's what's differentiating you, and that's the whole that's very
Yeah.
powerful.
Yeah.
I can I can see why you're running around the country, the globe, um,
Yeah.
talking to people, because this is a real problem
It
in
is a real
corporate,
problem.
at least corporate
Yeah,
America.
it's a big problem. It's a big problem everywhere. Fortunately for me, it's a big problem everywhere, which is great. Which is great for me. And I've had the experience now for 12 years, uh, or more than that, 15 years, working with different organisations, helping them to understand how to apply the approach in their particular environment. And I do the same thing with my clients. I say, here's my approach, here's what I do, here's how I do it. And I would like this relationship to be ideal for both of us. I'm not looking for like a lot of clients. I'm looking for a few big, profitable, ideal clients for me. And ideally, you'd be one of them. So let's talk about how that might work or not, because I don't want a lot of clients. I haven't got a lot of time. I want a few clients I can produce good outcomes for, because the biggest sales team I've got, Walter, I've got a huge sales team around the world, right? That sales team is my clients,
Right, you're all your
all my
happy
happy
customers,
clients,
happy
because
clients.
and they recommend it to other people, and they also move on. They move from different companies. If they're senior in one company and they want to get promoted, they'll often take a role somewhere else, and they'll take me with them. And over a period of time, that's business building for me. So it works for my business too. So what I attempt to
Yeah,
make myself and I ask them all the time, how could I make this more ideal? Like, what works better for you? Because I'm attempting to practice what I preach.
it's a powerful question. It's a powerful question, like that. I try to do it at least twice a year with a client that and I try to do it with a cigar and a cocktail, where we have some time to in the space to have the right conversation. But it's like, what could we do
yeah,
better? What felt right? What felt like we missed the mark a
yeah,
little bit? And to me, it's about constantly looking for better ways, better, to improve. Um, and what's driving it for me is just I want to get
yeah,
better. I want to provide more support and value for, because I've grown my business the same way with introductions and referrals from people that, they're like, you got to talk to
yeah,
this guy.
yeah,
Um, and it's fun. Like, we all want to get paid, right? We all want to add value, but to me, what's fun is watching the
yes,
transformation
yeah,
and seeing that
yeah,
happen, right? And there's a moment where it's like, they got it. It
yeah, yeah.
clicked, and you feel comfortable that they're going to progress, right? You can't take the foot off the gas, but you feel like it
Yeah.
clicked, and right. Does that happen for
Yeah,
you?
absolutely, and it's often that more personal conversation, and it's often when they start sharing problems and concerns with you, and
Hmm.
it gets more personal, and that I like that because that means they're trusting me more. The relationship is deepening, and it means I can
Yep.
genuinely understand what it is they're looking for, and the client becomes a lot of my clients have become friends in that respect because they know they can trust me with their concerns, and they're all concerned. They're all under a huge amount of pressure, financial pressure. They've got business targets to meet. They've got families to support and to care for. They've got a health regime they're attempting to complete. They're often the sort of people I work with are often traveling quite a lot. So you become what used to be called a trusted advisor. You become someone that they
Hmm.
trust, that is advising, and they know that you're on their side. And the relation, and you can,
Yeah, you're sitting
yeah,
at the
yeah, it changes.
same side of the
Yeah,
table,
yeah,
right? And seeing the world from their
yeah, and
perspective.
from their perspective, what I attempt to do is always keep some distance because I still need to be not their friend because I still need to often give them advice they don't want to hear or tell them things they don't want to hear as a external advisor helping them. And quite often I'm invited into like board meetings or senior leadership meetings to ask questions they're all too afraid to ask each other because they've got careers and politics in play, right? So I'm the guy that can come in and say,
Hmm.
why aren't you asking the clients into this conversation? I can ask that question, but they can't, right? And
Right.
often I'm asking the questions my client wants asked, but can't because of political or, you know, cultural issues internally. So and I love that
Sure.
process. I
Yeah.
love it. I love being that change agent. It's really interesting.
Well, it's coaching. There's similarities to the coaching piece of it, because you have to, you can see what they're capable
Yes,
of, and they're capable of more,
yes,
and it's your job to get them to realize it for themselves, which is a lot like parenting.
yes, yeah,
Um, if you do parenting, like, I'm not an expert, but if you allow your kids to make some mistakes that aren't terribly painful, but painful enough for them to pay attention and learn, and then give them some guidance when they're in the right frame of mind, and ask them questions. It took me a while to figure that out, but if I ask questions of my daughter, it's much, 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 much more smooth
I,
than if I say, "Hey, why don't
yeah.
you do that?"
I've got three daughters, so I know what that's like.
Oh my
It's
god!
yeah, it's a and they're each very different, and it's a whole different ball game. It's a very different ball game. Fathering them. It's interesting. I was working with a client recently. I won't say the name. It's a global provider of heavy mining equipment, Japanese based, and and I was having this conversation with the regional sales director, uh, and they have a scale. It's from 1 to 10, where 0 is we are a supplier to you, and 10 is we are indispensable for you. You know, we are an indispensable part of your operations globally, and their goal is to move their major clients, their major customers up that scale from a 3 to a 4 or a 5 to a 6. And my job with them is to help them go about doing that. They've got the scale, they've got the objective, they're embracing this idea of being customer centric. But they think, okay, how do we do that? Like, what's the how piece? What's the execution piece for us? Because for them, a sale could be worth $1 billion, right?
And it's a
It's
long
a long
cycle.
cycle. It takes a long time. And it could be like a 2 or 3 year cycle. So we're talking very long term. And there's multiple players involved.
And if you're dancing with the wrong opportunity for 2 years, you've wasted 2 years
Yeah.
of
Yes,
time.
and you've got competitors. I mean, the question I'm asking them is to say, well, what are your competitors doing? What if your competitors were doing this, right? Which they likely are. Like, I remember I used to drive to the city when I used to work in the CBD of Sydney, to drive across the famous Harbour Bridge, and it's always a traffic jam at peak hour traffic. And there was a great billboard there that said, "Don't just sit there, call a client," like when you're in the traffic. Then the next billboard said, "Don't just sit there, call someone else's client," right? I like the second one better. I'm thinking I'm calling my client, but I'm thinking maybe someone else is calling my client. I better call them. It's a great way to drive mobile traffic, right? To drive, great for the mobile company. Awesome. A lot of those people were like me with clients, right? I'm thinking, what if someone else is calling my clients and talking to them, right?
That's a great billboard campaign. I
Yeah,
love that.
at work.
That's
Well, I'm
awesome.
thinking, what if someone else is calling them and they're asking them how they make themselves more ideal, and they're building relationships? Because of course the door's always open. It's very rare that the door's shut. They'll at least
Right.
have the conversation. So I assume that's happening all the time. Yeah.
Everybody's phone can ring if somebody
Yeah,
dials it.
or they,
So you
yeah,
never know.
and it's even more concerning now, because you think, well, anyone can open up YouTube or open up Google and type in client centricity or customer or whatever it is you're typing in, and you might find me, right? Like a client
Yeah.
of a competitor, they might
Collaboration.
find me, right? And might say, this guy walking along, man, he looks like got interesting. I might talk to him, right? That might happen,
We're back.
right?
We're back at the
We're back.
beach. We're back at
We're
the
back at the
beach.
beach. That might. So I'm always thinking that. I'm saying, hey, I'm not going to scare you, but that's likely. If they're good, they're probably calling them. They're probably a prospect for. And in most
Hey,
industries, there's 2 or 3 major competitors, right? Very rare, like only
yep.
one supplier per industry. That's rare. So yeah, they could be called. So what would they be doing? What would you do then? Like, imagine that's happening assume it's happening all the time. Assuming, yeah.
Well, a fear is a wonderful
Yeah,
motivator if it's
yeah,
managed. So so I got one more question, but like how you work with, like, talk about your ideal client, somebody that's committed to
yes,
transformation, someone who recognizes that they need to get better,
yes.
but what do they does it market, can talk about that, so if somebody's listening they know I should call
Uh,
you.
uh, Ideally, there's someone. I work better in what I call mid-tier or large tier, like mid-tier organisations or larger organisations, because they've got the scale that my sort of approach can help. And if they're at a stage where they've done everything else and they'd like to know how to grow profitable revenue and have that conversation, I'm happy to talk to them. I may not be able to help them, but I'm happy to have that conversation, because there's a particular set of criteria that I have that I know that I can help that organisation. Because what I don't want is to get engaged with someone and my approach doesn't work, because that will spread faster than the ones that do work. Bad news travels faster than the good news. So if you're that
Absolutely.
person and you'd like to have that conversation, by all means, reach out and have it with me. I mean, I work in 12 countries. I'm not just working in Manly. Otherwise, I couldn't afford the kids and the wife and the house, right? So I spend,
Especially with
yeah,
big
yeah,
girls.
they're a lot more expensive than boys, a lot more expensive. Yeah, so that conversation we welcome. if that's something you're
They're,
interested in.
they're very expensive if they're very expensive if they like to ride horses. That's my
Well,
experience.
mine don't ride horses, but they have very expensive traveling habits. Let's put it that way.
Hmm. We all have our crosses to bear, Peter. So let me ask this question before we get into trouble
Yes.
with that. Um, does do you have a relationship with
Yes, I
cigars?
do. Yes, I do. And I was thinking about that when you asked me that question earlier. I began my consulting career working for an organisation called Rogan International, which no longer exists. It's been bought out and bought out and bought out. It was run by a guy called Peter Rogan, who was in New York, right? He's a New Yorker, and he started this sales consulting business, very successful. And I was working in the US for Rogan, and I got to meet Peter Rogan, who was like my icon then, the guy that started this business. And he took me. He was an interesting guy. He was a concert level piano player. He acted in off Broadway Shakespearean plays, and he developed this approach to communication and sales communication, which was unique at the time. And he was like a bit of a god for me. And he invited me. I think it was the Yale Club in New York, which is
Hmm.
the university club, very old school club. I think the
Hmm.
Bush family. There was photos of the Bush family up there on the like
It's a
on the wall. A
beautiful
beautiful
building.
building, beautiful
It's a
beautiful
beautiful.
club. And then he did something really. We had lunch, and then he said, "Look, Peter, if and we got on really well. I loved meeting like raconteurs and entrepreneurs like him." And he said that there's two things we've got to do at the end of every Yale Club lunch. We've got to drink brandy and smoke a cigar, right? And we finished lunch at about 1:32 p.m. And I was still extremely jet lagged. I had like a 20-hour jet lag still going on in my brain. I'm drinking this brandy, smoking these cigars, and he kept me there for 3 hours, right? Smoking cigars and drinking brandy. And I don't know whether it was the alcohol or the cigar smoke or the jet lag, but I was like in a space I've rarely been in since. But for me, it's like a special occasion thing. It's like I'm celebrating something. It's not like a
Mhm.
day-to-day thing. Because I swim most mornings. I'm swimming a couple of kilometers, which is what, about a mile and a half or so in
Yeah,
about
mile.
a mile or so. So I can't afford to have my lungs too congested because I'm doing that every morning. But as a special occasion, if it's a birthday, if it's a wedding, if it's a birth, if it's a baptism, if it's whatever it might be, to me, a cigar is a it's a celebration thing. It's a way to celebrate. Yeah,
That's a good reason to have a cigar. It's a good
yeah.
philosophy to have. Um, I like. Have you ever had? I like to have contemplative
Okay.
cigar, and for me that's where I just take. It's just me and the cigar, a notepad and a
Yeah.
pen, and it's like I'm trying to sort
Okay.
something. I'm trying to figure out a problem and
Yeah.
unravel it, and this is to me my hands, right? I'm sort of occupied, which allows my brain to focus on the
Okay.
issue, and I'm distracted myself so I can focus on the
Okay.
issue. And it's that's a and I can imagine if you did it on the beach, um, and you had a cigar and a notebook and you're watching the sunset and you're just kind of having that moment of try to sort an issue. That would be an interesting thing because you're a thoughtful guy that has some wonderful ideas that are gonna can really change an
Yes.
organization. I'd love to hear if you ever tried a contemplative cigar on the beach one day. That would be after you swim.
I often do. I often do what you're saying without the cigar. Like I regularly in the morning will journal in the morning. Like I'll have that reflective time early in the morning. Usually
Mm.
after a swim, I like to do it like around sunrise or so, when my brain hasn't kicked in too much yet, and just reflect like more longer term.
After
I'm reflecting more longer term, thinking about the sort of guy I want to be in 10 years or where I'm going to be in 5 years, and just bring that back into my mind, like bring him back into my mind and think, am I on the path to where he is or where he is? Because I'm headed towards him. And I
Love
like
it.
to do that. Then I'll just finish that Peter Rogen story if I can. This is
Sure.
not completely legal, but I'll share it anyway. I met with I had the cigars with him. We got on brilliantly. We spent that night together as well. I was traveling back home through Austin, Texas. I did some work there, and I told him about the Peter Rogen story. And this guy had a connection with a guy that was importing or had access to potentially cigars from Cuba. Let's put it that way, right? And I
Sure.
knew the sort of cigars Peter liked. And through this guy, I bought him. It cost me, I think it was $200 to buy these cigars, right, from Cuba. The Cubans, and they were the
Hmm.
timber box with like a little piece of little wrap around them, and they were a very beautiful box of cigars. And I managed to get them back into Australia, and I posted them back to him, right? I posted these cigars, but they found
Oh,
him, and that just boomed the relationship because I actually thought about him, and I thought about these cigars. I managed to find them, and I managed to get them to him, right?
that's
And he
huge.
was he was this was through a couple of client connections I had in Austin, which I'm not quite sure how this guy was operating, but he managed to get them. He managed to get them. I didn't ask how, right? and
Right. Well, why would
and,
you
and
ask?
he got Peter the cigars, and he loved them, and he sent me a photo of him smoking one of these cigars, and that cemented and that cemented that relationship with him. Yeah,
Of
which
course,
is great.
because it was thoughtful. It was on point, right? Like we talked about earlier. Like, what do you get somebody as a gift? Like, well, that's a gift that he might buy for himself, but when it comes from somebody else who
Yeah.
understood him, it just validates that
Yes.
connection. But you broke several laws over here, so taking them out of the country is one thing, but then shipping them back into the country
Yeah,
is
yeah, that was
another
a few
problem.
years ago, and that was through some people that I still know these guys. They're I'll just call them, they're very entrepreneurial in how they work.
Hmm. I have some friends like that too, for the same reasons. Um, but there's nothing wrong with it nowadays. It's I don't even think it's illegal because our relationship with Cuba is um, been modified, and I'm not even sure if we're still
Yeah,
mad at
yeah.
them.
I think you're. I
Wonderful
think you're mad
people.
at. Yeah, I love the Cubans. It's a great country. Awesome, awesome people. Awesome athletes too. Awesome individuals. Some awesome athletes come out of Cuba. I don't know what they're.
And really great
Yes,
artists and musicians
yeah.
come out of
It's great
Cuba.
artistically, great
Um,
athletically. It's just an awesome place. It's yeah, yeah.
it
It's
is. We just need to get them. So I have a Canadian friend who says that he went back. He went to Cuba last year, and this was his words. Right. This is how he thinks of us Americans. Because I wanted to get over to Cuba before you guys came down and screwed it all up with all of your hotels and
yeah.
um, which
Which happens.
which he's not wrong.
Yeah.
It
It,
does. We tried in the '50s, and that
yeah.
didn't work.
That's happened a bit in the
Um,
Bahamas. Was it Paradise Island I worked at, and it's a lot of the islands one huge hotel with a big casino in it, and it just doesn't look great. It's
no, it's when you come into the island on a boat. That's what you see is this thing that looks like it's in the center of London. Um, yeah, I like the natural,
yes,
especially in the
yes,
Caribbean. I mean, some of those jungles and the mountains, the Blue Mountains in Jamaica. I mean, I know there's a lot of poverty and terrible things there, but from a landscape perspective, flying from Montego Bay to Negril on a little airplane is one of my favorite
yeah, yeah.
experiences because you just see those mountains and the water. It's
It is,
gorgeous.
and that's why you
So
go. You're going for something different, not the same. You're not flying from
exactly,
like New York to Bahamas to see New York like on an island. You want to experience something different, get a fresh perspective, and it's that's a concern. That happens everywhere in the world. Yeah.
exactly. All right. I appreciate it. We'll have your website and LinkedIn in the show notes. Is there any other spots that people should go to
No,
track you down if they want
LinkedIn
to
and
talk to you?
website's great. If you want to reach out to me, you get all my contact details there. If you think this is an approach you'd like to talk more about, by all means, reach out to me. Otherwise, I hope this conversation has given you a fresh perspective on how to think about growing profitable revenue.
I love these conversations because I learn things. I get a different perspective, and we had a great conversation about. I learned some stuff about
There
Australia,
you go.
so you helped me plan my
Yes,
trip. So the
I'm a
triangle.
travel agent in disguise.
Appreciate it. Thank you very
Pleasure,
much, man.
Walter. Bye.